Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. Welcome to part 2 of my 16,000 subscriber Q&A series. We're going to get right into the questions because, as always with these Q&As, we have a lot of ground to cover. So first question. Sean, congrats on 16,000 subscribers, well on your way to 50,000, okay? My question is, I noticed that all of the things that are third-party graded are categories that are dominated by male collectors, whereas things that women like to collect, such as jewelry, glass, pottery, vintage kitchen items, handbags, fashion, pretty postcards, etc., are not third-party graded. What does this say about the psychology of collecting and the need for men to have the absolute best condition copy of their objects for bragging rights? Okay, a lot to unpack here. First, predominantly, men are more drawn to collecting than women. Now, the gap is closing. It used to be for every 3 men that identified as collectors, and remember, a collector is born, they are not made, so men that would identify truly as having the collecting bug, if we can call it that, there would be 1 woman counterpart, meaning for every 3 men, there would be 1 woman that also identifies as a true collector. Well, in the year 2024, believe it or not, for every 3 men that identify as being a true collector, now we have 2 women that will identify as being a collector themselves. Now, you are correct here. Usually, in most cases, with few exceptions, as men and women age, they tend to collect different things. Now, there are markets that both men and women operate in equally. Let me give you a prime example. Vintage glass, antique glassware, pottery, art specifically attracts an equal amount of women and men collectors, especially if it's high-end art. If you have somebody who's wealthy that is going after high-end pieces of art, believe it or not, that market is split 50-50 equally between men and women. This is not uncommon. So are traditional antiques. Now, when we get into some of your pop culture collectibles, if we look at Pokemon, if we look at comic books, if we look at video games, if we look at Magic the Gathering, obviously vintage toys, action figures, items like that are predominantly dominated by men. Are there women collectors that are operating in those markets? Absolutely. But predominantly, if we look at comic books is almost 90% composed of men compared to women. Now, if we look at what do women tend to collect then, you already pulled out a lot of the key collecting categories that they tend to go after. One of the big ones right now is higher-end handbags and fashion. Luxury handbags and fashion are very big amongst women collectors right now. So is, to a certain degree, costume jewelry and the like. You do bring up here other collecting categories like dolls, glass, pottery, vintage kitchen items, postcards, etc. Now, here's the thing. Of all the items that you listed, most of these items are not practical in regards to third-party grading. And if we look at this through the lens of, let's compare some of these collecting categories to equivalents that men identify with, are men trying to third-party grade Harley-Davidson motorcycle parts, vintage advertising, classic cars, vintage Rolex watches? Those particular items are not being third-party graded either. Even if we look at Nike Air sneakers, vintage Air Jordans, there's no company as of yet that has come on the scene that is attempting to grade sneakers that has clout and credibility that I'm aware of. Now, that may change in the future, but I just don't think it's very practical to encase a lot of these items that you're bringing up in this question in plastic with a little numerical grade. I mean, obviously, if we encase a vintage or antique Tiffany glass vase in plastic and it falls off the shelf, you're going to have one mess to clean up because it's going to crack in that case. It's just going to break just like it would if you would drop it and it wasn't encased in plastic. So a lot of these collecting categories that you're naming, just to end this question once and for all, are really not practical to be encased in plastic in the first place. Now, I do want to hone in here. You did bring up dolls and postcards. Postcards is really a dying collecting category. There are postcards out there that sell for thousands of dollars. I'm well aware of that. I do have a video planned on that. It's in pre-production hell. But at present time, just know that the category of postcards is not a robust category in the antiques or collectibles trade at present time. Dolls can be graded. As a matter of fact, if you log on to the collectibles group out of Georgia, which owns companies like Action Figure Authority, AFA, and VGA, Video Game Authority, you will see they do own and operate a doll grading company. Unfortunately, it hasn't really caught on like action figure grading has caught on. Now, to your point, does that mean that men are more geared towards liking or wanting to own graded collectibles? The answer is yes, in a certain sense, but it's not something that is so lopsided to the point that only men are gravitating towards owning these items simply for bragging rights. As a matter of fact, if you spend any time on this channel, I usually instruct all of you guys that if you do go after graded collectibles, rather than attempting to invest in the highest graded item out there on the open market, you would be better off employing a concept that I teach on this channel known as the optimal collecting grade. As a matter of fact, if you collect coins, currency, or even established vintage and or antique sports cards, and also comic books, the optimal collecting grade, that theorem that I teach on this channel, is going to save you, in most cases, thousands upon thousands of dollars if you're attempting to invest in these markets. I am never, and never have been, a fan of owning the highest grade of anything. Now, in certain markets, it makes sense. For instance, the Pokemon market is very speculative. If you're going after PSA 10s in that market, because of the volatility, more on that coming in an upcoming question in this particular Q&A series. But just know, if you're going after items like that, due to the speculative nature of those markets, in certain cases, you are better off going after a PSA 10, especially if you look at the population reports and it shows that there's thousands upon thousands of the items you are going after already graded and they are in PSA 10 condition, then you really have no choice but to go after a PSA 10 condition in most of those categories. But overall, you are better off not going after the highest graded copy that exists. As a matter of fact, in most cases, that is a fool's game. Next question. Sean, I thank you for the videos. I have been watching them for the past few years and have not missed a single one. God bless you. You often talk about collecting categories that are slowly dying, and categories are also discussed that may be overvalued. I usually don't use the term overvalued. You will often hear me use the terms selling at a discount or selling at a premium at present time. For instance, even during the graded video game bubble that occurred right before and during the pandemic that we had, I never really used the term overvalued. I said that they were selling at a significant premium at that time because the market was either in what I described as a speculative bubble or a speculative euphoria. Well, if you go back and you analyze the prices from that time period, obviously that's 100% true. Now that we have hindsight behind us, or we can go back, look at these prices, and see what they're selling for now. You will see that prices have fallen significantly. But they were never really overvalued. They were selling at a significant premium due to the fact that the market, and I have to say it this way, was allegedly manipulated. Continuing with your question. My question is, in what markets do you see a long-term perspective? More than 5 years. If we start from the principle that people become sentimental about products they grew up with later in life. This happens in the age category between roughly 40 and 65 years. After passing the age of 65, people start to part with their collectibles again. If we want to speculate on what would be popular in the year 2030 to 2035, should we look at what was popular in the period 1990 to 2005? What products from that era will be in demand? Well, here's the problem. We already had a massive speculative bubble that propped up the value of items that were produced in the 1990s all the way up to 2005. If you don't recall, part of the great video game bubble that I just mentioned included Super Nintendo games, Sega Genesis games, and also Nintendo 64 games. And all of those particular products were produced from the year 1990 onward for the most part. To be fair, the Sega Genesis did debut in 1989, at least in the US. So you could make a case, okay, a year early than what you're stating here, 1990, the Sega Genesis was readily available on the market. But if I recall, the Sega Genesis in the United States came out, I want to say, late 1989, if I remember correctly. I believe so. Maybe a little bit wrong on that, because I remember I got the TurboGrafx 16 first, then I got the Sega Genesis, then I got the Super Nintendo. So my heart and mind belongs kind of to the TurboGrafx 16. But even that market too, that fits within your date range here, already experienced a massive speculative bubble. As a matter of fact, go and look at some of the prices of TurboGrafx 16 CD games. Some of those late release Super CD-ROM games that released in the US, like Dungeon Explorer 2, Super Air Zonk, Bonk 3. Some of those games are selling, even now, on eBay for hundreds upon hundreds, if not in certain cases, thousands of dollars on the secondary market. And we're not talking about factory sealed here. So this is where I don't agree with your assessment here, and I'm going to correct you, and I'm going to tell you where to look otherwise if you do want to take advantage of prices increasing for a lot of this stuff. You go on to state what products from that era, meaning the 1990s to 2005, will be in demand. Tamagotchis, Game Boys, iPods, Super Nintendo, PlayStation. If you had to choose something, what would it be? High risk, high reward. Well, first of all, I would not go after any of the items you just mentioned because, again, they're already selling at a premium because people like me grew up with them, and now we're starting to buy back our childhood. And a lot of those particular items have risen in value exponentially as a result. If you really want to take advantage of the next great speculative bubble, and again, I really don't advise this because everybody is already hoarding this stuff in mass thanks to the amount of social media influencers that are on YouTube, that are on TikTok, that are on collecting forums. Look at modern era Nintendo Switch games. Look at PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 games. I walked into a Best Buy the other day. I got a copy of Mass Effect, the Legendary Edition, for the PlayStation 4 for $11.99, brand new factory sealed. I threw it in my video game room. I'll probably never crack the shrink wrap and never play it, but for $11.99 for a remastered edition of the first 3 Mass Effect games, how can you lose? You see what I mean? Look for stuff like that. The problem is, and this is where I have to be cautious against a lot of the people out there that are going to heed this advice and they're going to start hoarding this stuff. Do you really think hoarding this stuff for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years is wise when you can simply put the money in a well-diversified portfolio or an S&P 500 index fund? Everybody is already going to be hoarding most of this stuff. There's going to be a lot out there. Case in point, look at the scarcity of Nintendo GameCube games versus that of factory sealed Nintendo Wii games. Almost everybody saved factory sealed Nintendo Wii games. Donkey Kong Country Returns, Super Smash Brothers, Super Mario Galaxy, Mario Kart Wii. All of those games are readily available in factory sealed condition. And if you look at what they're selling for on the secondary market versus what they originally retailed for, you will see that your money, in most cases, was better off in an S&P 500 index fund. You guys need to realize that this is a new age of collectible hoarding, collectible investing that we find ourselves in, where the internet, social media, collecting forums, a lot of these particular individuals that want to sell you Fugazi and fairy dust have all come to tell you that this stuff is going to be valuable in the future. And to be fair, some of it will. There's no saying that When I look into the future 10, 20, 30, 40 years out, I do see people paying a premium for certain factory sealed Nintendo Switch games. Here's the problem though. I can't tell you how much of a premium they're going to pay and what games they're going to go after. And furthermore, if we're looking at just video games, when we talk about PlayStation 5 and heaven forbid factory sealed Xbox One X games, now we have a problem because some of those games require a digital download or a patch immediately when you put the disc in. That requires the server to be online. So is someone really going to pay a premium for a factory sealed Xbox game 20 years in the future, knowing that even if they wanted to open it up and play it, they couldn't because the Microsoft Xbox One X server is now offline to download that patch that tells the system to run that game? And this is a problem that we're running into. This is why I've always given Nintendo the edge when I talk about collectability going forward, because up to the most part, Nintendo has always been operating differently than Sony and Microsoft. And even when we look at the market dynamics of Sony and Microsoft, Microsoft has been gung-ho on an all-digital future for far long now. It's Sony that has pulled back a little bit and said, you know what, we're not going to go full in on this digital future for a lot of our systems and games yet, but they are getting there. And that's what's scary when we look at what's going to be popular video game-wise into the future. Now, if we look at Magic the Gathering, we look at Yu-Gi-Oh!, we look at, heaven forbid, Flesh and Blood, we look at Pokemon. Again, a lot of these products in modern times are being hoarded. So I'm going to ask you, what Pokemon sets are going to be selling for a premium in the future? It's impossible to tell, guys. So now you have to buy them all. Is that really a valid financial strategy to partake in the year 2024 when everybody else is already doing that? Is it really wise to go down that path? In my assessment, the answer is no. So there you have it. We're at this interesting crossroads where the antiques and collectibles trade is changing almost overnight simply because everybody is hoarding this stuff. And it's creating a dichotomy in the market of epic proportions. So I don't know how to guide you here. In all honesty, what I would tell you to do is, if you really want to speculate, I can give you some ideas, but I would also tell you, make sure that you put money in a well-diversified portfolio rather than tying it all up in a lot of this modern era mass-produced crap that everybody is hoarding. And that goes if we're talking toys, Lego, whatever it is. Pretty much it's being hoarded in mass at present time. Next question. Sean, congratulations on 16,000 subscribers. I think I subscribed when you had 1.5 thousand subscribers, so 1,500 subscribers or thereabouts. I've watched most of your uploads, but I don't think this question has been answered. If it has, then apologies. What is your greatest return on investment in the overall antiques and collectibles trade? Okay, this is something that a lot of people still do not get. When I was literally in high school, right when I was out of high school and in college, eBay pretty much came on the scene. eBay was created in 1995. It was originally called Auction Web, and then the name eBay was pretty much adopted in 1996. I was one of the first sellers in Pennsylvania who came and started selling antiques and collectibles on eBay with a dial-up modem where you couldn't even put a picture on eBay of the item you were selling. And I chose to sell a lot of video games, a lot of pop culture collectibles. So the first business I ever created was called Electro Games. I actually still hold the rights to the Electro Games eBay account that is out there. It's a recreated account because the original company that I formed was sold for an undisclosed sum. I'm not going to go into that. I got 6 figures for that particular company back in the day. A lot of people don't know that story. We're going to keep it that way. That's why I always laugh at the video game collectors who come at me nonstop telling me I don't understand the video game collectible marketplace, because that's really where I made a lot of my money, especially when I was just out of high school, especially when I was in college. I made a ton of money in this market because at that particular point in time, pre-Nintendo, Vintage video game systems like Atari, ColecoVision, and Television were all the rage. I remember going to flea markets and yard sales, paying $10 for an Atari 2600 with 20 games. I would go home, clean it, test it. I would get $100, $150 for the thing. Back in the 1990s, the mid-1990s to the early 2000s on eBay. Now, I saw the writing on the wall because I was still working at this particular point in time. Obviously, I had a large knowledge base with a lot of my mentors that helped train me on the antiques and collectibles trade. And I knew it, they knew it. Eventually, the speculative bubble that propelled a lot of these items to new heights was going to pop. And it did pop. Right around 2004, 2005 is when the pre-Nintendo speculative bubble pretty much crashed and dissipated. Well, during that time, I made a ton. It's unfathomable the amount of money I made in that market at that particular point in time. I mean, I'll just tell you guys this. I was doing several thousand a weekend. It was that intense. Just from going to flea markets and yard sales back in the mid to late 1990s. It was like shooting fish in the barrel. That's why I don't think a lot of you guys understand how much the antiques and collectibles trade changed. Now that everybody has a smartphone, now that everybody sees all of these resellers, all of these social media influencers telling you what you should be buying at flea markets, it caused the whole market dynamic to change and just blow up. I remember going to flea markets and I would flat out tell people, this was back in 1998, 1999. Hey, just to let you know, thank you so much for selling this. I'm going to sell this on eBay. And they would look at me and they go, whatever that is, you do you. Even in early 2000s, I remember telling people that video games are going to eventually become extremely collectible. And this was at a time where I started hoarding copies of stadium events. I started going after a lot of your very rare and scarce Nintendo games because I knew that market was going to blow up next. And I remember I went to a yard sale. Some guy had all this Nintendo stuff just put out with $5 a game. And I got a copy of Stadium Events. I got a copy of Panic Restaurant. I got a copy of a lot of these rare games. And I said to him, video games are going to be the next big thing. I tried to give him information. I'm like, you sure you want to sell these? And he's like, listen, kid, everybody's got to collect something. If you think video games are going to be collectible, just buy what I have here and just get out of my sight. And I'm like, okay. I plunked down $100 on the table and I bought 20 Nintendo games. And most of them were very rare and scarce. And I put them away. This was pretty much how I made my money. So the answer to your question, as much as the video game collecting community is going to hate me, I made most of my money on vintage video games. That's where I got a lot of my wealth, that and pop culture collectibles. And I took that money, and yes, to be fair, I was young and stupid. I did a lot of dumb things with my money. I blew a lot of it on women. I'm not going to lie. But I also invested wisely and put that money in a well-diversified portfolio, mainly consisting of, you guys know the rest, index funds. And at this particular point, I also started going after more higher-end rare collectibles, like rare coins, certain comic books that were ungraded at this time, items of that nature that I had a general interest in and really had a passion for. And a lot of those coins that I bought at this time, they also ended up increasing exponentially in value, simply because what is it that I tell you guys on this channel? If you want to invest long-term in the antiques and collectibles trade, history, antiques are more for long-term investing than that of pop culture collectibles, which is more on the nostalgia side. So that is the greatest market that I ever got a return out of. I still, of course, speculate in video games and related items to this day because I hate to say this, I know some of you are going to hate me for this, I make a lot of money in that market. That's why when I identified the great video game bubble, one of the biggest criticisms I get to this day is, Sean, I think it's great that you identified what was happening with Waddick Games, but let's be realistic. You also sold into the market and you profited exponentially from this. And the answer is yes, I don't deny that. I know how these markets work over the short term, over the long term. And I give all this information away for free, and some of you guys come here and criticize me rather than listen to what I have to say. if you would take this advice to heart and understand how these markets work, you guys would be doing excellent for yourselves. Instead, you guys fall in love with it and think it's going to go higher and higher because everybody loves Pokemon, or everybody loves Mario, or everybody grew up playing The Legend of Zelda. That's great. What does that mean in the year 2024? You guys got to understand there is a beginning and an end to everything. If something doesn't cross over to being a highly cherished and valuable antique, I hate to say this, there's usually a reason why it didn't. It's just like some of you guys that criticize me when I bring up Pez dispensers, or Schwinn bicycles, or Lionel toy trains, or Western toy collectibles, or Mark's playsets. It's all relevant, guys. You need to understand that from dust to dust we are created. We create all these things. From dust to dust, they all shall return. There are several things that break the rule that pretty much do become historic artifacts. But if you were attempting to invest in those particular items, they would already have substantial history behind them. Historic documents, certain coins, firearms, edged weapons, high-end pieces of art, items of that nature, not pop culture collectibles. Okay? Learn from that. Next question. Sean, you have slightly touched on this before, but it would be an awesome lesson to have on bottle collecting. Can you please share the name of the author of the bottle books in the background? Okay, I'm assuming you are referring to this particular book here. This is Antique Traders Bottles Identification and Price Guide. This is actually an older edition. This is the 6th edition. This is actually by Michael Pollock, who is a well-known expert in this market. If you want to get a copy, I suggest you just log on to Amazon or even eBay, and you can probably get a copy of this. Any edition is pretty much okay in this market. I would try to get the newest. I don't know what the newest edition is at present time. I will tell you the market for vintage and antique bottles is very interesting. It's an established market. It's more on the antique side of the equation when we talk about antiques and collectibles. But overall, you will find that this particular market does have a steep learning curve. So you will need to utilize some type of reference point or book, study this market indefinitely, and then when you're ready, choose to invest or spend money in this particular market. That being said, there's a lot of opportunity if you know what to look for in this market. Meaning if you go to a lot of antique fairs, if you go to a lot of even flea markets, if there's a bottle dealer there and you know what you're looking for, if you have the knowledge, you can make money in this market. That's going to conclude part 2 of the 16,000 subscriber Q&A series. Part 3 will be uploaded soon. Thank you so much for watching this video. And please, as always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below.